Do you have stick drift? At this point, it's no secret that Sony is having trouble getting PS5s into people's hands, but if you haven't managed to get one yet, there's a pretty big silver lining. It turns out that the $80 DualSense controller that comes with the PS5 is experiencing the dreaded stick drift. But real quick before we get into it, if you want to stay PS ready, make sure you're subscribed and have the notification bell set to all. If you're one of the 50 million people out there who have a Nintendo Switch, you've probably heard of stick drift at some point, but the easiest way to describe it is it's this weird phenomenon that happens after a while where your joystick won't recenter properly after you take your hand off of it, and it'll start registering phantom inputs. As a PlayStation example though, it'd be like if you were playing Days Gone and then you put the DualSense controller down on the table and Deacon started driving his bike halfway across Oregon without you even touching the controller. Sounds pretty inconvenient, right? The way it's talked about online makes it seem like it's something that every controller you ever had is going to experience it at some point, but for me, I've only had it happen once, and to be fair, it was pretty creepy. I was playing Zelda Breath of the Wild, I put the controller down to go get a cup of water or something, and I came back and Link was just walking across Hyrule Field on his own. It really creeped me out because at that point, stick drift was not a widespread thing, and we didn't really know what it was, but now, these days, it's pretty common. So the first report I've read on this happening on the PlayStation side comes from iFixit. They're pretty much any console maker's worst nightmare because as soon as a console comes out, they get it in and they tear down literally everything they can to tell you how easy it is to fix. What they discovered is that for the DualSense controller, Sony is using this off-the-shelf joystick part that's been in circulation for a really long time, mainly because it's cheap. But because it's been around for so long, they've taken a look at it and they've realized that it has a pretty definitive shelf life, which is around 2 million cycles of using your joystick. So they did the math and that basically equals out to 5 or 6 months of playing Call of Duty 2 hours a day. Yeah, that's not great. The reason that this is such a problem, other than the fact that the DualSense is $80 and should last more than 5 or 6 months, is the fact that joystick drift is really hard to fix. If it were as simple as just cracking open the controller, replacing a part, it would be kind of, you still have to do that every 6 months, but it's something you could do. The problem is you have to crack this bad boy open and solder some parts into place, which the normal person has no idea how to do. So if it was happening after like 5 or 6 years of using the controller, chances are you probably have a new one anyway by that point, but the fact that this is potentially happening multiple times a year is the reason that everyone's upset. Of course, this is obviously covered under the controller's warranty, so if it does happen to you, all you have to do is call a number and Sony will tell you, hey, here's a center you have to send it to, you grab a box, you throw the controller in, and then you actually have to pay the shipping to get the controller to them, which is kind of dumb in my opinion, but then they'll fix it and send it back within 7 to 10 business days. It's not like the best process, but seeing how when you send a Switch to Nintendo to be repaired, they sometimes wipe the thing and you lose your Animal Crossing island, it could definitely be a whole lot worse. On top of that, this is a brand new console, so there's obviously some faulty ones out there. People are flooding the support lines asking how they can buy a PS5, so it's just gonna be that much bigger of a pain to actually get in touch with Sony. And unlike the Xbox Series X, you can't really just plug your DualShock 4, one of the 15 of them you have laying around, into the console if you do have to send your DualSense in. You can do it if you're playing PS4 games, but if you want to play PS5 games, you need a DualSense. So if your DualSense gets stick drift and you're away from it for 7 to 10 days, you're probably going to want to go out and buy an $80 controller. You're just going to come home pissed off. It's going to be a bad time overall. But with all that being said, if you do start to experience a little bit of stick drift, there are a few things you can do to try and remedy it yourself. The first one is what you should do if you're having any problems with the controller at all ever. You just flip it over and take a paper clip and unfold it and stick it in the back where there's that tiny little pinhole button and hold it for 5 seconds. That will completely reset the controller to factory settings, and a lot more people than I expected were saying that did fix their stick drift issues. It's weird because it seems like a hardware thing that wouldn't be affected by software, but a lot of people are saying that it is completely down to software. Another thing you can do that's sort of preemptive to make sure this won't happen in the first place is keep your damn hands clean. We're so deep into the pandemic at this point, you should already be washing your hands a few times a day. You should just have general cleanliness, but that's gonna stop your controller from getting dirty, having grime built up into the joystick areas. But if you slipped up and had a late night Doritos Locos taco and you got some like gunk in the joystick holes, which is kind of disgusting to say. All you got to do, grab a Q-tip, some isopropyl alcohol, and then just rub it around the edge of the joysticks and move the joysticks. That'll unlodge any of the gunk, and hopefully it comes out your way so you can wipe it out. But if it goes into the controller, it really shouldn't cause that many problems. The alcohol will help, I promise. Isopropyl alcohol is like a cure-all for any electronic. I love it. I just keep a bunch of bottles under the sink for this purpose. Another thing you can do is grab a can of compressed air and just blow out the controller once in a while, you know, get the cracks and crevices that fill up with that weird dark stuff that you see on a white controller. Why the hell did Sony even make this controller white? Every time I look at this thing, I like don't want to pick it up because I'm just scared it's gonna get dirty. I also wouldn't really go as far as taking the controller apart to fix anything. If it gets to the point where you feel like you have to do that, you should just send it into Sony and bite the bullet, because taking it apart will probably void your warranty, and there are a ton of weird little parts, especially with the triggers and the haptic feedback, that you can break. And if you break those, you're gonna have a lot tougher time getting Sony to just fix it outright. They're gonna probably say, hey, what were you doing digging around in this bad boy, you know? So if you're having a problem where you feel like you have to take the thing apart, just send it in, get them to replace it. There's also a pretty surefire way to fix this temporarily at the software level, but the actual console itself doesn't support it. It's by a game-by-game basis, and that's just increasing the dead zone on the sticks. If you've never heard that before, the dead zone is the circle around the middle of the stick where it won't register any input. So if you move the stick just a little bit forward, you'll see in a game, your guy won't start walking until you break out of that threshold. Certain games, like Call of Duty Warzone, for example, let you increase the dead zone. So if you increase it just enough where it's outside that range at which you have stick drift, you won't experience it anymore. Obviously, you're gonna have to readapt to pushing the controller just a little bit farther to get movement, but if you don't wanna have no controller for 7 to 10 days, that's a temporary fix where you can wait it out just until Sony has a little bit more time on their hands to take calls from people who have faulty controllers. Now, the reason this is so frustrating to people really isn't Sony's fault necessarily. It really comes down to Nintendo. They knew that these joystick parts were faulty and they put them in the Nintendo Switch. And now they're having some major backlash with huge lawsuits that are going through that are making them have to pay a lot of money for willingly selling products they knew would fail. If Sony went into the PS5 generation not knowing that these joystick parts they were using for the DualSense were going to fail, that's one thing. But because of what's going on with Nintendo and how public it is, there's really no excuse for Sony to have been using them. Obviously, it was a cost-cutting measure. They wanted to save money making these controllers cheaper on the outset, but now they could potentially be paying way more money on the back end with all these class action lawsuits that are probably going to go through just based on what's going on with Nintendo. It's a weird lose-lose situation for them in the long run. There is one big silver lining here, and that also comes from looking at the past, specifically at the DualShock 4. So if you've had a PS4 from the very beginning, you got a DualShock 4 with the console. You probably remember that at the time, a big issue with it was that just from playing games for a few weeks, you would rub off the rubber texture on the joysticks to the point where it would actually rip and there was a sharp plastic edge under there. Now, Sony never really publicly acknowledged that was a problem, but as time went on and they started putting out more colorways of DualShock 4s, people started to notice that that rubber was not breaking down nearly as much. It was a great way to fix the problem where they just never acknowledged it and then over time fixed it on the back end, so they didn't have any public controversy. So if you consider what's going on with the DualSense right now, I'm sure Sony is already aware of it and they know how big of a problem it is, so they're gonna be looking at this controller saying, maybe with future iterations, maybe when we bring out new colorways, we'll start using better joystick sensors so we don't have to deal with this in the long run. And finally, the last good thing I have to say here is that I don't necessarily think this is going to be as big of an issue as all these websites are making it out to be. Obviously, if you can create this controversy surrounding the hottest new console that no one can get when people are already mad and frustrated at Sony, you can keep people clicking on your website. So if you can have this stick drift thing, this phenomenon, and make it seem like this massive overblown problem, you're gonna keep doing that. So if you do get stick drift, yeah, it sucks, but I'd say the vast majority of us out here, if we're just careful with our controllers, we keep them clean, we're gonna be just fine. And then by the time it does start to happen to most of us in a couple years or whatever, there's gonna be a special edition or a brand new color or like a Last of Us 3 version that we'll already probably have, and our launch edition will be cracked and destroyed in the corner of our gaming room. But that's all I have for you today on stick drift, which is my least favorite term of all time. Remember, if you want to stay PS ready, the best thing you can do is hit the subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Anyway guys, my name is Jimmy Champagne and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.